This podcast is sponsored by Xgrowth. Xgrowth is the APAC ABM agency. If you and your organization are looking to land and expand enterprise and mid-market deals, Xgrowth is the agency to help. Xgrowth works with a wide range of international and global technology vendors, service providers, and B2B SaaS companies. If this sounds like something you're interested to know more about, make sure to check out Xgrowth at xgrowth.com.au. That's xgrowth.com.au and chat with the APAC ABM agency.
What's up, marketers, and welcome to another episode of the Growth Colony podcast. I'm Liza from Xgrowth to tell you that each episode we bring in B2B leaders to chat about how you can achieve those everyday wins in the marketing world. Whether you're new to the B2B game, working at a leadership level, or even just showing some interest, we know you'll love the episode. So grab a drink, get comfy, and enjoy the show.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode. I'm Shaheen Hoda with Xgrowth, and today I'm talking to Drew Sechrist, co-founder and CEO at Connect the Dots, about lessons from the early days of growing Salesforce. Drew was employee number 36 at Salesforce and contributed to the growth of the company from almost no revenue to $1 billion as the VP of high tech verticals. I'm really excited about this conversation to get a small glimpse of what made the massive growth of Salesforce possible, and also to hear what Drew is up to now. So on that note, let's dive in. Drew, thanks for joining us.
Shaheen, thanks for having me. Really happy to be here with you.
Absolute pleasure. I'm super excited. This is a very rare opportunity, so I'm very excited to dive into this. I'd love to kind of start from getting a better understanding of like a short version of how you landed at Salesforce in the first place, and how did that connection happen?
Yeah, so there's certainly a bit of irony in how I landed there. I cold emailed Marc Benioff in 1999, and I was so just to kind of set the stage. I grew up in the East Coast. I went to school in North Carolina. And I was working for a relatively small company in North Carolina that did Salesforce automation and CRM implementations of packaged software products that's kind of how it was done back in the day. These were client server applications. And I read an article in the Wall Street Journal about this guy named Marc Benioff who was leaving Oracle, and he got $2 million from his boss, Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle, to start a company called Salesforce.com. And Salesforce.com was going to rewrite Salesforce automation software from the ground up to run on the internet, which now in 2023, that sounds like, no big deal. But back in 1999, that was mind blowing. And we were thinking, our little consultancy in North Carolina was thinking about doing something kind of like this, but we just did not have the grand vision that Marc had for sure. And I recognized that what I read, it sounded like Marc had this grand vision, and I thought he was heading absolutely in the right direction. So I cold emailed him, and I said, Marc, could we? My company resells Salesforce automation software, and we implement it for clients, and we customize it and support it, and we handle other software vendors. Would love to handle Salesforce.com. We'd love to implement Salesforce.com for your customers. And he wrote me back very quickly and said, we're not going to have a reseller channel. We're going to do this all direct ourselves. And I very quickly replied, well, then we should talk about something else because I like what you're doing. And he said, fly out to San Francisco and let's talk. And so that's what I did. I flew out to San Francisco, met with Marc, it was a very small team at that point. I don't know, maybe 10 or a dozen people or something. And I, talked to Marc, and he said that, what do you want to do for us? And I said, I don't know, Marc. I hadn't really thought that far ahead. I can, pretty much do anything for you except code. If you want me to code, you're gonna have to send me back to school to bone up on my coding skills. And he said, well, you should come sell for us. And then, immediately made an offer to me right there that was, too good to refuse. And I took the offer and flew back to North Carolina and gave like my 2 week notice, and then packed up my stuff and drove all my things in a U-Haul cross country from North Carolina to San Francisco and started there right around Thanksgiving of 1999 in downtown San Francisco. And that was the origin story.
Damn. Damn, that's such a great story. That's it's definitely like a Silicon Valley type of story. I love it. What do you think were some of the key factors that allowed Salesforce to grow in the early days? I mean, you were there. You just said, when you got the offer, there was like 10, 12 people there, and by the time you left, the company was doing $1 billion in revenue. In those early days, what do you think were some of those factors that allowed Salesforce to grow the way it did?
There's a lot. It's great to be lucky enough to pick the right company to join at the right time and experience all those things. I think teasing out all the different things that went right would take a long, long time. And people have written books about it, including Marc. Marc's written Behind the Cloud, and there are a lot of good stories in there, and some of them are even true. There's a lot of truth in there. So I think a couple things stand out to me. One is getting the culture right from the start. And, the culture there was super collaborative. The vision was really clear to everybody at all times. We use this thing called V2MOM, which is an acronym that stands for Vision, Values, Methods, Obstacles, and Metrics. And, a lot of people out there in your listenership probably are familiar with OKRs. OKRs are a very popular way to get alignment across the company. V2MOM is like that, but it's got some different elements to it. I actually think that it's got some really great elements that are missing in OKRs. And it helps really align the company behind what we're trying to accomplish together as a team and how we're going to do it, and divvy up responsibility and make sure that's clear. So you've got like MECE coverage, mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive coverage of all the things that you need to accomplish as a team in order to accomplish the vision that you're going after. So Marc did that. Marc had, we had the V2MOM from the very beginning, so it was really clear what we were doing. I think the product at first was really simple, but it worked. It was very, very, very simple, but it worked, and it did this really core, simple thing that people needed to have done, which is the basics of Salesforce automation. Just manage your accounts, your contacts, your opportunities. Give me a forecast, and make that all really simple and accessible to me, and let me turn it on quickly, without a lot of IT support. And so the product just worked, and and we used it ourselves. So it was an amazing experience. And I realized a lot of as I've gone through my career, I realized a lot of salespeople do not have the luxury of selling the product that they themselves use every day. And I feel so sorry for those people, because when you do use it every day, you become an expert on it, number one. So it's really easy. Like, how does this product work? It's so easy for me to tell you because I use it all day, every day. And we all did. You also see the shortcomings of the product, and you become its greatest critic too. So you're giving like all kinds of feedback to your team, which that is it's an incredible feedback loop to make everything better. You make the product better, you make the messaging better, you make your sales team better. It's just it's an amazing thing. So if you can find yourself in, a situation like that where you got a great culture, you got really good alignment, you've got a tool the thing that you're selling is the thing that you're using all day, every day. Those things really help a lot. And then I'll kind of double down on the culture element. This, I take this for kind of granted now because I'm a Silicon Valley person, and it's table stakes that if you're going to start a startup in Silicon Valley, then everybody's got equity in the company. That's the whole point. We're all there to build this thing from scratch, or come in at whatever point you come in and take it to the next level. And to really get everybody aligned, V2MOM's awesome for aligning people behind the vision and how we're going to do things. And then you got to get the incentive structure right. And then equity is such an easy way to do that. Just make sure that everybody's got equity in the company. And now everybody's running through walls to make everybody successful. Whatever you can do to help the team build a better product and sell a better product, you're going to do. And so that worked out great. And then I think Mark also just set an incredible example about he's a very sales and marketing, forward CEO. And so he set the tone. Remember when I said that I cold emailed him and he emailed me back almost immediately? He did that. And like I'm not quite sure what his response rates are these days because his company is so gargantuan. He's got to just have such an incredible amount of email coming through. But for the first decade, his response rate was insanely fast. And he was also willing to help. If it made sense, he wanted to jump in and help anywhere he could. And so, asking him to reach out to people because he had the good title or he had a relationship with them that would help the sales organization, he would absolutely do it in a heartbeat. And he set that tone, and he expected that of his entire, his executive team and the entire company. And so, if anybody, wasn't doing that, behaving like that, they kind of got weeded out pretty quickly. Like we're all on this team together to make this team win. And that's the culture. Like that's got to be your culture as an individual on this team, or else this is not the team for you. So those are some of the things that stand out for me that, I think they really help the company succeed. And they're not, as I've gotten older and seen a bunch of other companies, I realize that these are just not universal things that every company does, but they are universal things, frankly, that every company should do.
I love it. I mean, yeah, some of those things that you've mentioned sound very key, and the high responsive response rate is such a simple thing, but it has massive impact. It's that rate of moving fast, and where some people just like sit on things and think about it, and some others move very quickly on them, and then the culture component, the marketing, the sales piece, the V2 mom model, that's all very interesting. What did you learn from Salesforce that changed the way you look and think about things?
I mean, everything. I went in there to be honest. I had worked at this small consultancy on the East Coast, and I didn't have any formal like enterprise sales training. I maybe read a book or two, but we were just kind of hacking our way through it. And when I got to San Francisco and I was hired in to be an account executive, and by the way, just to clarify this, we did not have a product to sell yet. When they hired me in, I think I was like account executive number 7. This is a little bit crazy, but this is how it was back in 1999. There was a lot of venture money sloshing around. And Mark's idea, I guess, was get a bunch of account executives to give the prototype or the beta product away for free, so we could get a bunch of feedback on it. And that's what we did. That's what I was hired to do. I was hired to give the product away for free at first, and we knew we weren't going to do it forever, but we did that for the first several months before we started charging for it. Before we, and then we took the kind of leap of faith, like we think it's good enough now. We've gotten enough feedback. We're going to start charging for it. I learned everything about sales from Salesforce. My bosses there, my colleagues, all my colleagues had, frankly, way more experience than I did, and so I just, I was a sponge sitting next to them. This is back in the day when people actually went to the office, and so we sat next to each other for all day long, and I'd hear what they would say, and I would replicate what they would say whenever they came up with some good way to explain a concept in the sales process. We were always like really hungry to learn from each other that way. So there was a lot of tribal knowledge that got generated in that room, in the small room that we were all in at the beginning. So I learned that. I also learned, I also learned the power of having relationships and a network, which I didn't have anything like that when I moved out there. When I drove that U-Haul from North Carolina to San Francisco, I didn't know anybody west of the Mississippi at that point. So I didn't have a network at all. I was young. I was 26 years old, I think, when I drove out there. And so, I was starting from scratch. But I was very lucky to be in this company that had a bunch of, really top performing people and really super ambitious people, and also inside of a culture where they're not just ambitious, but they're also super, super, super helpful for everybody else. They really want everybody there to succeed. And so gradually over time, I got exposure to more people, and I did a good job for the company, so my reputation grew. And so gradually over time, I built my own network, and I could start to leverage my network in the way that the people who were senior to me were able to leverage their networks to help us do everything in sales. Get our foot in the door, get the right meetings, anchor high with senior executives. Multi-thread, what's now called multi-threading deals, so that you're working all different angles of the opportunity, so that you understand who's involved in making this buying decision and making sure that all of their needs are addressed. So all that stuff I learned there because I certainly didn't know it before I took that job.
Interesting. So there are a couple of I think there's for me like there are 3 points that I took away from that. So it was really that foundations of enterprise sales. It was the power of the network, and then multi-threading deals. Touching on the multi-threading, like what was so critical on that front? Can you dive a little bit deeper in there in terms of like how did you go about it, and what did that look like? Because I think multi-threading is an important concept from both sales and marketing perspective of making sure you cover the whole buying unit. Can you talk a little bit about more about the approach that you have to multi-threading?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about it in the Salesforce, that first decade at Salesforce. One of our legendary sales leaders there, a guy named Dave Rudnitsky, had these really great sayings that people would remember to, help you think about what you need to do to be an effective salesperson. And one of his phrases was face in the place. It meant you had to get your face in the place. Wherever that company was, if that company was, their office was in suburbs of Boston, then you had to get your face in the place. In the suburbs of Boston, you had to be in that office. You had to be meeting with the people that you knew were the primary folks. But when you're in there, then you need to be spreading your relationship breadth. So figuring out the other people who are going to be involved. So it's like, who else is going to be involved in implementing this? Whose team needs to sign off on this? Who are your internal customers that are going to be, using the data that's going to be coming out of the system that you're going to be implementing? And get introductions to those people, build relationships with them, make sure you understand what their requirements are, so that you can actually become the best representative, or, you and whoever your champion is inside the company, become the best representative of like, what does this company need from the solution that they're going to be buying from us? And who are all the stakeholders? What do they individually need? What does a win look like for each of them? And so that was the first decade of Salesforce. Now things are different now. It's 2023. We've had the pandemic, come and pretty much go at this point. And the world's different. So we're all like scattered around the planet. Nobody really knows where anybody is. They're just a little square on a Zoom window. And so that has become harder in some ways, because you can't just get your face in the place and then meet people, in the hallways and ask to be walked around. But I do think it has, in other ways, it's actually kind of become easier, because everybody's just used to hopping on these Zoom meetings, and you can ask for introductions to those people. You can figure out who they are. You can still ask the same questions. Who are the other people that are going to need to be involved in this decision? Who's going to be impacted? Who are your internal customers? All that kind of stuff. Then you can ask for those introductions, and you can, have a quick, hey, let's jump on Zoom and have a coffee for 15 minutes. I just like to understand your perspective on this project, since you're going to be a key stakeholder. You can do that. The other thing is that's like spreading your relationship, breadth inside the company. That there's another thing that you want to do frequently in sales, which is you want to make sure that you're high enough in the organization. And, if you can come in from the CEO, if the CEO can say, okay, I think you're an interesting potential solution for us, and I'm going to sponsor you. I want you to go talk to my team and go do due diligence with them, and then come back and present to us your solution and why it's the right solution, and we'll make a decision about it. That's a great way to come into a company. So if you can start out that way. If you don't start out that way and you start lower in the organization, then you do want to get up there, and and that requires a little bit of nuance and tact, because you don't want to piss off the people that you're talking to. They don't want to feel like you're going over their head, but at the same time you're in a precarious position if you're not high enough in the organization you might just, worst case scenario is like you lose a deal because you didn't get high enough. More common scenarios, things just don't progress because you're not high enough. And so you got to figure out how do you get to those relationships that where you can, have the kind of no BS conversation with the executive to find out what's going on and like, are we in consideration? Is this really a priority for you? The thing that the problem that we're looking at solving with you, or is it not? And be able to, have those straight conversations with the people who are ultimately going to be the ones making the decision. More challenging now in some ways because of, there's no place to put your face in many situations, but I think that the fundamentals still, hold true. If you've got relationships into those people, you can get to those people, and they're just a Zoom call away then, and you can build those relationships.
Interesting. On the back of that, it would be also great to kind of get a glimpse of what were the steps when it came to selling into an account. I feel like we've touched on some of these, but what did that look like? So if you were targeting one account and you were going after it, what would be the steps that you would go through in order to open up those doors and kind of deepen those engagements to eventually get that sales?
Well, I mean, step one is you got to get your foot in the door, and that can happen, one of two ways essentially. It's either inbound or outbound. And so Mark did a good job of creating a lot of market interest for Salesforce because he had some really good marketing messages, the classic no software. Back in 1999, that was a really radical thing. What? You're a software company that says no software? What's that even mean? And people actually got that message pretty well because everybody was sick and tired of implementing software, like getting a CD-ROM and installing it to stand up a client server Salesforce automation system. They hated it because it was it just didn't work well, and everybody knew that. So that message was good, it resonated, and so we would get we definitely have inbound leads from that. People would hit our website and they would express interest. They might try out our free product or or test drive the Salesforce product, and then we would that was great because somebody's basically put their hand up and said, I'm interested in what you guys do. And then our job was to qualify them as quickly as possible. And we had a lot of small companies in the early days that were looking at us. And so there was not really a lot of revenue potential there. And we had to kind of help them be successful as best possible, but also, kind of deal with them very quickly and then disqualify them because they weren't really a sales opportunity for us. And we gravitate towards the bigger companies and then qualify them in. And then, you would try to get, I don't think we had BANT and MEDIC and all these other qualification rubrics that exist today. I don't think we had that, but I think we probably had in the early days several questions that we asked, like, do you have budget? Do you have, who's going to be making this decision? Is this, where is this on your list of priorities? Is this a priority for this quarter or next quarter or whatever? So qualify them. And then make sure that you're getting, before you would get to, you'd spend too much time with anybody, you would, ask to get to the person who's ultimately going to be making the decision, to at least have a quick conversation with them to confirm that this is a priority for them and what they want to get out of it and any criteria that they would have they would need in order to make a positive decision. Maybe they've got a certain budget. Maybe there are certain key requirements that they know that they're only going to say yes to those things. So you'd want to talk to those people or to talk to that person before you committed to engaging too deeply in helping the evaluation team at the company figure out if this is going to be a good fit for them. And then ideally what you do is you do a hell of a demo, right? Like you'd customize product to work really well for their environment and knock their socks off. And then they would see it and they'd be like, wow, that's incredible. And then we'd probably do a little bit of a, like back of the napkin ROI analysis. How much is it going to cost to implement this? And then by implementing it, here is what the money you're going to make, and here's the money you're going to save, and here's your ROI, and get them to, agree that, yep, that's what it looks like. And then you enter into negotiations like, okay, well, it's, there's no time like the present. You told us that you wanted to get this thing implemented, in time for your Q2 kickoff. And so if that's the case, then we need to sign basically in 2 days So that gives us enough time to import your data, implement, do all the customizations, and then get the training ready to deliver on that date. And you work backwards from that. And then ideally, if you have anchored high enough, if you had the opportunity to build a relationship with the decision maker and had them tell you what they needed up front, then the final closing conversation would ultimately usually be with that person. And you negotiate the close, you sign the contract, you pop the bottle of champagne, and then you train their team, and everybody's happy. So that was kind of the idealized model. That is like, that was the inbound. That's if people have come inbound and expressed interest. Outbound is a more challenging one. It's always been a more challenging one. But also outbound is where potentially your biggest opportunities are. And so when you realize like we are a good fit for Acme Inc., they should really use us. Now what's your next step? If they haven't come to your website and expressed interest, what do? Well, you got to get your foot in the door somehow. And historically that's been cold calling. And literally that's used when we were doing this at Salesforce in the early days, it was literally cold calling. You'd figure out the person's phone number. You might dial into the assistant and then say something charming in order to try to get to the decision maker. And maybe it worked and maybe it didn't work. Yeah, maybe one thing I did back then was I would get up very early in the morning and I would call very early in the morning to these executives, I mean, literally, I'd be up at like 4:30 a.m. in San Francisco, and I'd be calling to the East Coast to get somebody at 7:30 a.m. their time, and that was early, and that was their early morning hours when they were just getting the day organized, and they were an ambitious executive. They, so they were there, and the phone rang, and like, and
Pick up the
back
phone,
then
see who it is. Yeah.
they picked up the phone. Who's calling me at 7:30 a.m.? Yeah, that's odd, and it was Drew Seacrest from San Francisco, and then they found that I'm up at 4:30 a.m. to call them because I'm spreading the very good news of Salesforce automation that they need. And so, you could catch people early in the day sometimes, but just by doing that. And that definitely got their attention and created a lot of opportunities and closed a lot of opportunities that way. Cold emails, that's another way that you would go outbound. And cold emails, they used to be things that you did one off, you would fire them off one at a time. And then in the last decade, that's become something that's become, like semi-automatic or fully automatic, where you've got tools that let you load in cadences or sequences, and then you blast out these emails in sequence in great volume to your targets. And it's, it looks like spam for the most part to the people who receive them, but some percentage of them hit at the right time, have the right message, and then they get a response. It's a very small percentage, and it's going down because the volume of these campaigns has gone up. It's so high now that it's like, even if you wanted to respond to all of them and be kind to everybody,
You
every
just
salesperson,
can't.
you just can't. It's impossible. That is a tactic that we used, and now it's a tactic that's been injected with steroids and done at super high volumes now. But then the absolute best, if you could do it, is figure out like who are the relationships that I've got already at this account, or who are the relationships that I have that I know that could get me to that person because they know each other, and it could be for any reason. They went to college together. They both used to work at Oracle together sometime. They play tennis together. Somebody's a board member on somebody else's, on their company. Somebody, their former colleagues, whatever it is, figuring out those relationships. And if you remember, I was referencing that legendary sales leader, Dave Rudnitsky at Salesforce. He had the great quote, the "Get your face in the place." He had another quote, and that was connect the dots. And connect the dots. This is the long arc here. I'm bringing it all home. Connect
Yeah,
the
I
dots
know.
meant how do we know people that can get us to the people we need to get to at the company we're targeting? And that became an art form, always trying to figure out like what are the relationships that we should be leveraging so that we can just go straight to the top or get right to the decision maker via and not through a cold call or a cold email because the probability that was going to be responded to is pretty low, but via a warm relationship, via the like oh yeah, our board member, went to college with that person and their friends. And so just have our board member send the email. And they're definitely gonna, that person's gonna reply because they're college friends. And then, the ask is basically, hey, I'm on the board of this company and I think it could be really good for you guys. They solve this type of problem. If that's a priority for you, I'd love for you to have a 20-minute call with the CEO of the company or the VP of whatever the company to see if they could help you out. And the probability that that gets read, replied to, and gives an affirmative thumbs up, sure, I'll take a call, is extremely high.
Yeah,
Extremely high.
compared to cold. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. So that was the thing that when that happened, it was just magic. There's so many deals, there's so many $1 million deals out there that just it happened because of that. Because there were the right relationships and you figured out that was the right relationship and you leveraged it and that just made all the difference in the world and you would have gotten $0 from that account, but instead you got $1 million because you knew that relationship existed and you could leverage it. So that was the absolute best way to start a sales cycle if you could. The problem was just figuring that out. It's very, very hard to do that. And in general, in a pre-LinkedIn world, it was very hard to do that. And frankly, in the early days of Salesforce, it was a lot of sending emails to all hands at salesforce.com. And you could do that up until you have a couple hundred employees. But then beyond that, it becomes a lot of noise. And that's what we did. Like in the early days, we would send emails out and say, hey, does anybody know anybody at Apple that we could sell to? And then you get like 5 or 10 people reply, yeah, I know so-and-so, I know so-and-so, I know so-and-so. And it worked. It was actually great. And unfortunately, it was like a victim of, well, it just didn't scale. Like as you got bigger, the company, you couldn't do that for everybody. And so it was like this beautiful thing that we had going, this email to all hands at Salesforce had to go away because there was just too much noise. And so it was shut down and then you had to try to figure out some other way to do it. And it really, like we never really recovered from that. Later, LinkedIn came along and LinkedIn, I think in some ways similarly, in the early days, it was like high quality relationship information. It wasn't like a super big graph of relationships, but it
Yeah,
was high
correct.
quality. If you were connected to somebody on LinkedIn in 2005, it meant you probably really knew that person in real life. And I think most people were like that. But then over the next couple of decades, what happened was it just got so polluted, and there's so much noise in there. There are all these people who are connected to each other, but they don't really know each other. And so unfortunately, it's kind of what is weird is like it got bigger and it got worse for this purpose because you couldn't really see who knew who anymore. And so if you try to leverage that graph, and we would do that at Salesforce, and now every company in the world tries to do this to some degree, you run into this problem of like figuring out. I can see that these two people are connected on LinkedIn, but do they really know each other? So if I'm going to
Yeah.
ask my board member for an introduction to that person because I see they're connected, and how many times am I going to ask my board member that, and my board member is going to say, "Sorry, I don't really know that person. Sorry, I don't really know that person." At some point, it's fatiguing to you to ask, and it's fatiguing to your board member to be asked, and so you just kind of deprioritize this because
Yeah, we just let
it's
it
just a hard.
pass.
So, but I digress a bit because you
Got
had
it.
asked
Got
about
it.
like
No,
what are the yeah.
that's very interesting because that also now I get where the name Connected Dots is coming from.
Hmm.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing on that front because I think that's a really fascinating journey as well in terms of what you and the team are trying to achieve.
Yeah. So to not to put too fine a point on it, we connect the dots. Wants to solve the problem I was just talking about, and give you clear visibility into who really knows who at the companies that you're trying to get to and the right titles that you want to get to. So if you sell to CMOs or VPs of RevOps or chief product officers or whatever it is, and you sell to Fortune 500 companies or you sell to the mid market, whatever your target companies are, the best way to sell to them is to have a warm relationship into them, and for all the reasons we just talked about. And the challenge is like, how do you find that? And our solution to this is we realize that there has been piling up for several decades now, this latent relationship history information that people are not taking advantage of. And it's in the form of email. And what does that mean? That means like, Shaheen, you and I, we've been, we're introduced relatively recently. We've had a little bit of email traffic. And so from, if you were just to analyze our email traffic, just the numbers of it, like how many emails were sent back and forth and when they were sent, you could probably, realize that like these guys have a pretty new relationship and it's it's a nascent relationship. It's not a real strong one yet. But if you looked at my relationship with like, Marc Benioff, you would see that there's a ton of email traffic going back, decades. And you would realize like these guys probably worked really closely together and know each other pretty well. And so that is, that's, when we think of email, we think of, I'm going to send an email to somebody and communicate something. That's true. That's its primary purpose. But there's this really interesting secondary potential purpose, which is analyzing all that email traffic to see who really knows who and making it very obvious for yourself. So like, this is what we do. You can create an account, a Connect the Dots account. You can connect all of your email accounts to it. And then we will analyze all of your relationships for you and give you a near perfect view of all of the relationships with all the people that you've had over the potentially decades that you've been communicating on email. And we can score all those relationships for you. And then we keep them all perfectly up to date. So as you might have been emailing with somebody who worked at eBay 15 years ago, and then they changed jobs a couple of times, and now they work at Amazon. You might you've got that old eBay email address for them. What we do is we come up with what's called a canonicalized record of each human being that you've communicated with, and then we automatically merge all of their different email addresses and give you a view of your communication and your relationship with that person since the beginning of time in one clean user interface. And that's Connect the Dots. So that's step one. Now you can use that individually, and you can opt in to be part of the Connect the Dots global network. And when you do that, you are sharing visibility to who you know with the people that you know. So anybody else who's on Connect the Dots, like your friends, your investors, your advisors, your colleagues, whatever it is, you can see each other's network. And all you're ever sharing is just the name of the person, their title, their company, and then these three dots that indicate how well you know them. Is it a weak relationship, a familiar relationship, or a strong relationship? And it's really innocuous information, but it's super, super powerful because then you can see like, oh, my board member really knows the CEO of this company that we would love to sell to. I'm going to ask my board member for the introduction. And you know that you're not wasting your board member's time. And you know that when your board member makes the request to that CEO, that there's a very high probability that he's going to get a positive response from that CEO. So that is kind of Connect the Dots in a nutshell. You can sign up and use it for free for life. I highly encourage you and all your listeners to do that. But your company can also turn it on for everybody in the company and build what we call the super graph for the company. And the super graph then has a combination of all your LinkedIn contacts plus all of these email metadata contacts with all this relationship strength visibility, so you can see who really knows who. And then you just basically, it's like putting on these glasses that give you like clear visibility to all the people that you can get to and the most efficient paths to get to them via the warm relationships that you have at your disposal as an individual and as a collective, as a company. And so that's what we do.
I love that. Scaling warm connections and warm introductions is just like you said, it can be a complete game changer, and it's always challenging to know where am I going to turn, who am I going to turn to, and so that's great. And so if anyone is interested, what's the URL? Where can they get more information, Drew?
Sure, just go to ctd.ai, like connect the dots. So ctd.ai. And you can also ping me if you have any questions directly. And I'm Drew at ctd.ai.
Awesome.
Have you read the State of ABM and APAC report yet? If you have, you'll know that 59% of marketing leaders are intending to increase their ABM investment in the coming year. Even bigger news is 0% of survey respondents are going to decrease their investment. It's an exciting time for ABM in the region. Discover the state of account-based marketing in APAC today. Download the full report at abm.xgrowth.com.au/report. That's abm.xgrowth.com.au/report.
Drew, before we wrap up, I got a couple of rapid fire questions that I want to go through and get your feedback on that. You good to go through those?
Absolutely.
All right, let's make it happen. So the first question is, what is one resource? This could be a book, a blog, a podcast, a talk, whatever it is that has fundamentally had a fundamental impact on the way you work or live. What comes to mind?
Just one, huh?
You got it. You just, well, if there's like three, we can go through the three as well.
Well, I'll keep it simple. I think in 2008, I picked up a book called How to Meditate. And I took it with me on a 2-month motorcycle trip through Mexico. And I read a different technique for meditation every day. And I tried it. And then I went through each of these different techniques until I found one that I really liked. And then I basically have continued meditating every morning since then. So I would say that's pretty fundamental change in the way I live.
Interesting. How to meditate. And definitely check that out. Okay, question number 2. If you could only give one advice to B2B marketers, salespeople, people in the B2B space, what would it be?
Put your feet in the shoes of the person that you're selling to.
Love it. Third one. Who are some of the influencers that you follow in the sales, marketing, leadership space? Is there anyone that you kind of keep track of and follow?
Well, I mean, I was very lucky to work up close and personal with Marc Benioff for a decade, and I think he's just amazing in this space. I think he's probably the number one to look at and see what he's doing. I'd also say, lately I'm tuning into like John Barrows. John was the guy who trained everybody at Salesforce for many years. He's got some great content and great thought leadership. I'd also say that Matt Cameron from Sassy Sales Leadership, I think for our industry, for the SaaS industry, he's got amazing content, amazing thought leadership for how to do B2B sales in the SaaS space. So those are 3 that I tune into.
Got it. I mean, they're all really awesome and great people. So thanks for that. All right, last thing. What is something that excites you about B2B?
About B2B?
About B2B today, yeah.
Okay. Well, not to pile on too much, but I think this is just exciting generally in the world. I think ChatGPT has just kind of blown my mind at what's possible. And I think that there is a Cambrian explosion of really cool stuff that is happening right now, and it's just going to accelerate in every part of our lives, but absolutely in B2B. I think that it's going to be able to do a lot of heavy lifting for us and make our jobs easier and give us really big levers to do our jobs better. So I'd say stay tuned. We've got some plans for it, but we're certainly not the only ones who've got plans for it. Everybody's got plans for it. I think it's a super, super exciting time to be alive in general, and I think it's a super, super exciting time to be in the B2B space because so much innovation is about to happen.
Love it. Yes, there's everybody's excited and everybody's kind of exploring that. So it's on my radar as well. I'm glad that we're on the same page there. So no, thanks so much for that, Drew. This was an awesome conversation. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing a lot of insights about outbound, inbound, about kind of methodologies and tactics and the culture at Salesforce and even your journey there. Thank you so much for sharing all that information and coming on the podcast.
Shane, it was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Today's episode of Growth Colony was produced by Alexander Hipwell and Liza Maywald. It was edited by Dave Samito with additional editing by Liza Maywald and music arrangement by Alexander and Liza. Special thanks to Tina Wabe. We couldn't make the show without you. Growth Colony is hosted by Shaheen Hoda, Director of Growth at Xgrowth. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Do you think you'd be a great guest or just keen for a chat? Send through an email at podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's podcast@xgrowth.com.au. That's all for now. We'll catch you next week. right here on Growth Colony.